we have two distinguished guests from CGAP operational team. To my far right, Michael Tarazi, based in Washington, D.C. He is leading member engagement and governance team in CGAP operational team. And to my right, Tim Lehman, based in Paris. He is leading the global policy architecture team. Under CEO of operational team, it has 5 leads, and we have 2 out of 5. It means that substantially we have more than 40% of operational team here in Tokyo. By the way, both of them practiced law before joining CGAP. They are lawyers and they are gentlemen. But please don't misunderstand that about gender diversity. The chairperson of board of CGAP, Peruvian lady. CEO of operational team is a British American lady. Majority of the, more than half of the board members are ladies. More than half of the operational team members are ladies. And more than half of the member, around 30 plus members we have, member representatives and Council of Governance of CGAP are ladies. So today, this is a bit gender biased. Michael is on his way back from Korea. Koiko is a newest member of CGAP. And the team came here for preparing Japan's G20 chair next year with Japanese government authorities. As you may know, under G20, it has a global partnership of financial inclusion, a GPFI, of which CGAP is the most important secretariat. By the way, I myself is Kazuto Tsuji, professor of Saitama University, senior advisor to JICA on financial inclusion, and I've been Japan's focal point for CGAP since 2008. Japan has been CGAP's member during past almost 20 years, thanks to Japanese government continuous contribution through Ministry of Finance to CGAP. Today, our two gentlemen will mainly talk about CGAP's new 5-year strategy, beginning at the beginning of this coming July. The future of financial inclusion for the poor, vulnerable, and marginalized. We are going to have around 1 hour presentation from them, followed by 30 minutes to 1 hour question and answer. But I'd like to ask all of you, please interrupt them during their presentation. Both of them are American law school educated professional lawyers. So if you don't speak up or interrupt them, all of us will be declared guilty automatically. Thank you, Tim. Sorry, Micah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kazuta-san. It's a pleasure to be here. Japan has been a member, as Kazuta said, for many years of CGAP, and unfortunately Japan is very far away from Washington, D.C., where we are based. So we don't often get the chance to come to Tokyo and speak with you, but we're delighted that we can be here today, and thank you very much for making the time to join us. I have to start with a confession first. which is that I'm always very nervous before I speak before an audience like this, because I once called my mom and I asked for some advice. And I said, look, I'm speaking before a very important group of people. What advice do you have for me? And she thought for a moment and she said to me in her native Arabic, Ma itzahit il nas, which means don't be boring. So I promise to do my best not to be boring this morning, but if I am, please don't tell my mother. I want to start with basically an introduction to financial inclusion and CGAP. And what CGAP is, we work towards a world where everyone has access to and can use financial services that they need to improve their lives. It's not just about financial access. It's about access and usage. To be able to use them, to have products that are relevant to them, and to be able to use them in a responsible way so that they are not taken advantage of. And the history of CGAP reflects the history of financial inclusion. This is a sector that has evolved considerably from its early days. Back in the early days when CGAP was first created in 1995, it was really around one kind of product, microcredit, for one kind of poor person, the micro-entrepreneur, the poor business person. This was back in the days of Muhammad Yunus and Grameen Bank. But since then, it has evolved. So when we started, we focused just on that. We showed that how to scale that up. We provided guidance to microfinance institutions and regulators. But then we noticed that we needed to have a lot more products and services for the poor, that the credit, microcredit alone was not sufficient. The poor needed payments, they needed insurance, they needed savings products. So in 2008, we started to explore those products, but also exploring new technologies that can help deliver these financial services. And I'm going to talk a bit more about what those technologies are. Currently, our approach is really about supporting inclusive financial markets as a whole. It's not just simply one intervention with regulators or around one product, but really about creating financial ecosystems that include the poor. And we are our next strategy, which starts next year, and that's really about financial inclusion in the digital age. How do we take advantage of all the new technologies that are out there, all the new players, in order to deliver inclusive financial services? So it just demonstrates how this has evolved from one product for one kind of poor person to all sorts of products for all sorts of poor people. This is a very expansive view of financial inclusion. Again, it used to be microfinance, and now we refer to financial inclusion. But why do we even care about financial inclusion? Well, a number of reasons. First, the poor are vulnerable to shocks. If you have an illness, if there are price increases, if there's a wedding, the poor don't necessarily have smooth revenue. They're not getting a salary every week. They might get a lot 1 week, but then nothing for 3 weeks. And so they don't have the ability to smooth their consumption. They're not like us. Many of us have savings, so if we fall ill, we're able to recover. For them, the shocks are much more important and pronounced. They also have limited opportunity because they don't have vast amounts of money. They spend most of their money on basics such as food, fuel, clothing. But they're also both consumers and producers. Remember when I talked about microcredit back with Muhammad Yunus, that was really about the producers. It was about people who had a business idea. How do we help them produce? But they're also consumers like us, and they need different kinds of products. But they're often forced to rely on the informal economy and informal mechanisms, borrowing from family or friends, money lenders who sometimes charge a lot of interest, pawnbrokers. They store their money in the mattress or at home, so it's much less safe. So, there's a number of reasons why we care about the poor and their ability to have access to financial services. But the facts are that the poor remain excluded. More than 10% of the world's population, so just below 1 billion people, live in poverty. Most of them are in Africa. Or I should say half of them are in Africa. This information just came out. The Global Findex is a World Bank study that tracks financial inclusion access. And their latest figure from just last week, 1.7 billion people are still excluded from formal financial services around the world. In developing countries in Asia, just to give it a bit more of a local context, 41% of the poor do not have a bank account. So there's still a lot of work to do. But the work is not around just financial services. The goal is not to get people a bank account, because having a bank account doesn't improve your life. Having a loan does not improve your life. It's what do you do with it? What is the evidence that financial services can lead to the other development goals? So you're all familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. Financial inclusion, access to financial services, is not one of the SDGs, but it is expressly recognized in several of them as an enabler to the SDGs. And there are a number of studies that demonstrate that access to financial services can help meet some of the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, SDG number 1, no poverty. There was a 2005 study in India that demonstrated when banks were opened up in areas with large unbanked populations, poverty dropped. In terms of hunger, SDG number 2, there was a study in Malawi that demonstrated that when you have savings products for farmers, they increase their investment in agriculture, and they actually boosted their crop output. They were able to produce more. And then on education, a study in 2013 in Nepal demonstrated that households that had free bank accounts spent 20% more of their money on education. So we are seeing the evidence that financial inclusion leads to other development goals. I know there's a number of you here from the Office for Gender Equality, and this is important because financial inclusion does have a very positive impact on gender equality. 2 recent studies of interest, one was in Kenya in 2016, demonstrated that access to mobile money, and we'll be talking about mobile money shortly, reduced extreme poverty rates among female-headed households from 43 to 34%. And in terms of good health and well-being, there was a study in Bangladesh that showed that a 10% increase in credit to women increased the nutrition of their daughters by 6%. And that's twice the impact of a proportional credit given to men. So what we see is that daughters' nutrition was more closely linked to have women having access to credit, and not the other way, not to men having access to credit. So there's some very real evidence that demonstrates the role of financial inclusion in improving the lives of the poor. I want to talk a bit about CGAP and our role in financial inclusion. We are housed in the World Bank. And the role that we play is both in the public and private sectors. We work with governments and regulators, but we also work with the private sector. And we work in the early phase of product development and research. So we try to identify solutions to certain obstacles. We experiment with the private sector, we experiment with regulators, we build capacity, and then ultimately others are crowded in, such as our colleagues at the World Bank and the IFC, to be able to scale much of our learnings. Everything we do is public. We have a website where all of our research is available to anyone. But although we're housed at the World Bank, we are an independent organization. We have a separate governance and funding structure, and that's where Japan comes in. We have a Council of Governors, which is all of our members, and Japan is among our Council of Governors. We have an executive committee. Since we have more than 30 governors on the Council of Governors, we have them elect representatives to our governing board, which is called the Executive Committee. That is run by the Peruvian woman that Kazuto mentioned earlier, though he forgot to mention that Kazuto was the chair of our Executive Committee for 5 years, and those of us who worked with him during that time very much miss him in that capacity. And then we have the operational team, and that Tim and I are representatives of the operational team, but we have around 45 staff members, mostly in Washington, D.C., a contingent in Paris, and then others spread around the world, primarily in East Africa and one in Asia. These are our members, and in case you were looking for Japan, I just made it easy for you with the red circle. But we have a wide diversity of different members in CGAP. We have not only bilateral agencies such as JICA, and you'll see some of the other larger ones such as the UK, the US, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. We have quite a few, and Korea being our most recent one. We were very excited to have Korea join us because we wanted more representation from Asia. But we also have foundations. Two of our largest contributors are the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the MasterCard Foundation. And then we also have multilaterals like the European Commission and IFAD, and then UNCDF, and then finally we have development finance institutions. So a good variety of members in our governorship. And this is really where our strength comes, because CGAP at the end of the day is a donor coordination mechanism. We have an annual meeting, and I know that we'll have some members of JICA there joining us in Dakar next month. But this is a chance where all of our members are able to learn from each other, learn from the work that we're doing. But our members also help us develop our strategy. We work with our members over the course of several years in order to develop the 5-year strategy, and we are currently in the final phases of our next strategy, which will be adopted next month. But we started thinking about our strategy way back in July of 2016, when we hosted a number of workshops around the world, including in India, in Africa, in Europe, in North America, where we brought together experts to tell us what do we think are the big forces that are shaping financial inclusion in our world today. What's happening in the world that we need to be aware of as we develop a strategy? And there were 5 that they identified, and I'll go into each one separately, but inequality, migration, digital economy, globalization of information, and the changing nature of work. Those across the 4 different workshops were largely identified as being the most important trends that are facing financial inclusion and development more broadly. Let me go into each and what we mean. Inequality. The good news is the overall decline in the number of the world's poor. There has been an overall decline in the number of world's poor. As I mentioned, we have about 10% of the world's population, or less than 1 billion. That's actually a decline, and that's actually very impressive that the number has declined when the population of the world has increased. So it's really quite remarkable. But the geographic shift has focused. Half the world's poor are now in sub-Saharan Africa. In 1950, half of the world's poor were in one country. Anyone know which country that is? India's a good guess, but not India. China. Yeah. Half of the world's poor in 1950 were in China, and China has made a lot of progress in developing its middle class, and so a lot of this progress has been demonstrated in the decline of the overall number of poor people in the world. But although there's been a decline in poverty, there's increased inequality both between and within countries. So there are a number of studies that demonstrate that middle and higher income segments experience higher gains. Okay, so the middle and the wealthy are getting more money, but the poor are being left behind. But even this statistic is skewed by China, because there the middle class has helped them make lots of gains. But if you look at the United States and Europe, the middle class is stagnating. They are not increasing their wealth and their control of assets. And many observers and sociologists have said this is partly to account for some of the political trends you see in Europe and the United States. The trends against globalization, against immigrants, the national interest first mentality might be in part due to this rising inequality. The second big trend we noticed was migration, and that's not necessarily cross-border, that's often internal, and that's driven largely by urbanization. In 1950, 1/3 of the world's population lived in urban areas. Today, approximately half live in urban areas. By 2050, it's predicted that 2/3 of the world's population will be in urban areas. Climate change is also driving internal movement. Many people in the rural areas who are noticing climate change makes it more difficult for them to grow crops are now moving to the cities or moving. in order to be able to earn a livelihood. And then, of course, conflict, the forcibly displaced. That was 65 million in 2015 alone, people who were forced to move for any number of reasons. And then, of course, refugees. And refugees here we mean cross-border. By definition, we're talking about people who have left their country of origin and gone across the border to another country. In 1960, there were 1.7 million refugees in the world. Most of those were Palestinian refugees. Today, there are 16 million. Or sorry, in 2015, there were 16 million refugees. So this is a problem that is increasing in scope. The third force that we have is the digital economy, and I'll be talking a lot more about that in just a moment. But, for example, there's more than 1 billion people who have access to a mobile phone, but not to a bank account. So how do we leverage that technology? This is becoming very important as we see this trend taking off. But this increases the risk of what we call the digital divide, which means those who don't have access to technology will fall even further behind, and that's very closely related to the inequality trend that I already spoke about. Globalization of information is another trend. It's also related to the digital economy. 90%, sorry, that should be of all today's data, not if. 90% of all today's data was created in the last 2 years alone. This is due to the fact that every purchase you make on the internet, every phone call you make on your mobile phone is being tracked somewhere. We know who you called, we know when you called them, we know what you bought, how much you paid, what you searched for before you bought it, what else you might have recommended to your friends. All of that is being tracked and stored somewhere. And as I said, 90% of all that information has been created just in the last 2 years. Everything that we know as humankind has been mostly in just the last 2 years alone. But this raises other risks around data privacy. Who knows what about you? Does the government have access to this information? What about consent? Did you ever consent to all this information being gathered on you? And maybe if you did consent, you were forced to consent. Press this button in order to access this service. But you didn't really have the time to think about that. And so what did you really consent to, and was that meaningful consent? Security issues, and then of course discrimination. You know, does the government has access to this information about you? Will they use it against you in some way, or will others use it against you in some way? Many people are very reluctant to have governments and people in authority to have this kind of information about them. So the digital revolution can be very positive, but it raises with it lots of risks that are magnified with respect to the poor. And the last trend that we are witnessing that influence financial inclusion and development broader is the changing nature of work. The UN has predicted that 600 million more jobs will be needed in the near future, but automation makes that even worse. 51% of jobs in China are estimated to be made redundant through automation. So that's more people who will be looking for jobs. The trend towards urbanization requires technical skills, not agricultural skills. So many of the people who are moving to the urban centers don't have the skills to be able to take advantage of any new job opportunities. But one of the positive developments is the gig economy. Airbnb, Uber, that can provide opportunities to people who don't otherwise have opportunities. They can, Uber drivers, you can take control of your own working time, your own economic life. You have a little bit more control through technology. So there's both a risk and an opportunity in the changing nature of work. So back to our strategy development, we did a lot of this work around the world to understand what these trends are. You'll notice that we are towards the latter part. We will have our strategy approved in May next month in Dakar, and we've already distributed the draft strategy to all of our members. So we're very excited to embark on that new strategy that takes into account all of those different trends. But the strategy, and I say CGAP 6 because that's the name of our strategy, it's our sixth strategy, is focused on sort of 4 different areas. One is around customers, that they have information, trust, confidence to participate in the financial system, that providers are providing affordable and responsible financial solutions for those customers, that there's an infrastructure that enables all of this open and ubiquitous competitive market, and finally, policy and regulatory frameworks for responsible financial inclusion are in place and they're enforced. We think those 4 areas coming together will make a very big difference in the role of financial inclusion and its ability to improve the lives of poor people. In the second half of my presentation, I want to talk about some of the big trends that we're witnessing and what they might mean for financial inclusion. The first is mobile network operators. I'm not sure, how many of you are familiar with mobile network solutions for financial inclusion? Have you heard of M-Pesa, for example, or a few nods? Okay, we're going to go into more detail about that. But for those of you who are not familiar with how this works, this is not internet banking. Okay, this is not I use my smartphone to access an app that allows me to bank. Most of the poor people around the world, although they have phones, they don't have smartphones. They still have the old-style traditional feature phones. So don't confuse this with internet banking for you and me, for people who already have a bank account and are now able to access that bank account from a different way. This is for people who don't have a bank account. So how does this work? So you have a bank, and this bank can't reach this client for a number of reasons. It's too expensive to reach them. They're not interested in reaching them. So then they put an agent in the middle. And these agents can be any sort of retailer, in some cases even individuals. But these are people that are usually more familiar to the customer. It's the local pharmacy, it's the butcher, it's the local store around the corner that they are generally used to shopping at. And this agent represents the bank for cash in and cash out purposes. So how does that work? Let's say the first step is that the client and the agent both open an account with their phone. And we can talk in greater detail if you want about how do they do that with know your customer rules and how do they identify themselves. But that's the first step, is they both open up an account that's accessible through their mobile phone. And then the client goes to the agent and says, I want to put 100 yen into my account. So she goes to the agent. Let's say Kazuto's my agent. I say, hey, here's 100 yen. Kazuto says, thank you very much. What's your phone number? I give the phone number. Kazuto then sends me 100 yen from his account to my account. As I'm waiting, I get a notice on my phone that says, congratulations, you now have 100 yen on your account. He has the cash, I have the digital money. And then the bank on the back end debits his account because he now has the cash, and credits my account because I now have the digital value. Okay? That's for cash in. So then I take this and I send it to my mother in a rural area. She wants to cash out, so she goes to another agent, let's say it's Tim in my mother's hometown. My mother goes to him and says, hey, I want to cash out 100 yen, is that okay? Tim looks in his cash drawer, he's a merchant, and he says, yes, I have 100 yen. Here's my phone number. My mother sends to him electronically 100 yen, and then when he gets the notice, he goes into his drawer and gives my mother the cash. Okay? This is how it works. Any questions about how this basic model works? It gets very complicated, and we talked to regulators over 2 days about how to regulate this, and I've simplified it, but it's very important that we understand the basics of how this works, because this basic model is becoming very, very popular around the world. The most recent information is that we have 276 such businesses around the world. And globally, there are 690 million registered users of this type of business model. But registered doesn't mean anything. Lots of people register, but they don't use it. So what you really want to look at is active users. Active is defined as at least one transaction every 90 days. And there, it's 247 million of that 690 million who are actively using these products. But even that's not necessarily the most important number. I think the most important number on this slide is this 29.3. Because that's the percent increase in just 1 year of active users. So you're seeing that more people are becoming active users in increasing numbers. This is very, very important because it demonstrates the ability to scale. These are global numbers. If you want to look a little bit closer towards your region, East Asia and the Pacific, 41 deployments, 36 million registered, 7 million active users.
Is it in China?
No. I'm not sure exactly what they include in here other than maybe the Indonesia, Malaysia. Yeah. South Asia, 234 million registered users. 86 million of which are active. But take a look at the increase. 55% increase in 1 year in terms of active users. Okay, that's really, really important to see how this is taking off around the world. The next slide I'm going to show you is a video. The video is on M-Pesa, and it's not a publicly available video. But I wanted to show it to you because it demonstrates the value to customers. But it's in Swahili. And they told me that you don't speak Swahili. And so we printed out a transcript. There is a subtitle in English, but it might be hard to see. So we printed out a one-page transcript if you want to follow along. But the video demonstrates how customers in Kenya are using M-Pesa for various value. And it demonstrates what the value add of these types of business models are.
Mpesa velo runa kinotito na rero dere ore ni unique institution sila na ngere ne mala samabe angasa log serian kare wa ginyage robia nya asa uriyo ngo ire na je ne silamu ore na be me rondo ngene ngire ne bi gesimu robia ni ndo ya bu asoja ya bu ya kolla aya bu do
huwa tunavua kwa sometime, kila mara tunaenda deep sea huko. Sasa unajua huwa tukienda mara nyingi ile huwa tunatumia kwa kuwatumiania pesa, kwa sababu mara nyingi tunaweza enda kama miezi miwili hatujarudi nyumbani, huwa tunatumia M-Pesa kuwatumia.
M-Pesa inanisaidia kwa kutunza hela zangu, kwa mtu ananitumia pesa, na nikipata mteja ambao akona chakula naenda nunua kutoka kwake na mtumia hela kwa M-Pesa, alafu ananiletea chakula na nunua kutoka kwake.
M-Pesa inanisaidia sana kuhusu customer wangu, sababu wananilipa through M-Pesa, ndio mtu anaweza kuendelea kukunywa ama kukula nyama. So inanisaidia hata kama ni wakati wa usiku saa 6 hata saa 7.
M-Pesa imetusaidia kwa kutuletea huduma ya kutoa pesa kwa ATM wakati wa weekend, holidays, kama agent wamefunga usiku, so unakimbia tu kwa ATM, unatoa pesa yako na inakusaidia kwa matumizi yako.
Siedimo ile ne ona raini ngiura uthie kwa Safaricom no muhako cokerio raini na mbia ciaku ikorwo ciho, koguo ni koragwo ese.
M-Pesa imenisaidia sana kiupande wangu, kwa sababu hata customer zangu wengine ambao unilipa kwa mwezi wabeba na kutegemea kunilipa kwa mwisho wa mwezi. Ninapofika mwisho wa mwezi napata malipo yangu kwa simu.
M-Pesa imekuwa ya msaada sana kwa watu wa area hii yetu ya Reserve, kwa sababu kitambo walikuwa wakitumia maybe mabasi ama posta ama bank, na wamama wazee wengine hawajiwezi wafike town waende kutoa pesa.
The Heart Run is an event that we have held for the last 13 years. It aims at raising funds to help children who have heart problems. Safaricom has been a key supporter to this event. M-Pesa presents us with a very easy and convenient way for any Kenyan to support this cause.
I always laugh when I see this very last part because it says serving over 6 million Kenyans. This was done in 2010, this video. Anyone want to guess how many customers they have now? It's more than 6 million. They have 25 million. That's more than half the adult population in Kenya has an M-Pesa account. So you can see just how powerful it is as a tool. And you can also see how they were building in new services. So one of the things you might have seen in there was the ATM. But I told you, you have to go to an agent. So how does it work with an ATM? Well, when you go to the ATM has a number. So instead of sending the message to the agent, I send the message to the ATM, and the ATM recognizes it and approves withdrawal. So now I can go any time of the night. I don't have to go to an agent. I can withdraw from my M-Pesa there. So they're building in other things as well. You can now access loans through M-Pesa, and so they're in insurance as well. So this is really expanding the array of financial services that are available in Kenya. I won't get into the regulatory issues because Safaricom is not a bank. So how do they allow this? And there's all sorts of discussions we can have about that, and Tim and I have worked very closely with regulators around the world in helping mitigate the risk and understanding how these models work. In some countries, this model is not permitted. In Africa, in the Philippines, it is permitted. Or I should say, in most of Africa.
And we'll be talking a little bit more about that at the end.
Let me go into the second big trend. So one was the rise of mobile network operators. There, that's a proven. We've seen the value of that because it's been in operation in Kenya now. We've seen how it works. We see that it's increasing in scale. But one thing we don't know about are the super platforms. And here you see sort of the history of Alibaba, who I'm sure all of you are very familiar with since it's one of the largest platforms in operation in the world today. But just a few things. I know there's a lot on this slide. But it started out as a sort of a commerce platform where you can buy and sell. But it wasn't until they launched Alipay in 2004 that you were able to pay electronically. And that helped Alibaba take off as a platform. And what's important about this is that this is both helpful for consumers and producers. Remember early on I said this is one of the challenges we have, that poor people are both consumers and producers. This platform addresses both sides of that equation. If you produce, you can sell on Alibaba. If you consume, you can consume on Alibaba. So it really served a need for many poor people. As you can see, they've now grown to the point where they also offer My Bank, which has 20 million borrowers. So they have also expanded into different kinds of products and services, financial products and services. And they now have more than 423 million customers. And they process billions of dollars, $900 billion in payments annually.
Here they are using smartphone.
They are using smartphone, which is exactly my next slide. If you notice why this is possible, it's because of smartphone expansion. This is going to be the way of the future. But before I go on to this slide, this is not just Alibaba that you have to worry about. There's Facebook, there's Google, there's Amazon. All of these big super platforms are now exploring financial services. And because so many poor people have access, I mean, in Myanmar, for them, they don't call it the internet, they call it Facebook. Are you on Facebook? That's what they mean, are you on the internet? Because they do have penetration among the poor. So once they start getting involved, they can be very transformative, very, very quickly, like Alibaba. And part of what's making this available is, as Kazuto pointed out, the rise of smartphones. If you saw in the M-Pesa video, the phone was not a smartphone that they're using. But you're seeing smartphones expand, particularly in Asia, where that red arrow is. This is going to be very unique here in this region, because we expect that by 2020, it'll be more than 100% penetration in Asia for smartphones. So this is what's going to allow those super platforms to really have an impact. The problem is we don't know what they plan on doing and how they plan on doing it, because they don't need to talk to us. They have more money. They don't need donor money. They have more research and development assets. And so what they're doing relatively privately. The third big trend is around government involvement. You'll see India is a really good example of how the government is proactively getting involved in financial inclusion by establishing the infrastructure that's needed to make it work. So in India they have what's called the JAM Trinity. The J stands for the low-cost bank account. You know, many people don't have bank accounts because they're expensive. So they said, great, we're going to force banks to provide a low-cost bank account. Then you have the biometric ID. Many people don't have access to bank accounts because they don't have an ID. There they have a biometric that's based primarily on your fingerprints. And then they also have the mobile technology. So those three together are building the backbone of the infrastructure of financial inclusion in India. Some very good progress. More than 1 billion IDs have been issued. 222 million accounts, 60% of which are for people who've never had a bank account before. And then, of course, one of the primary reasons that the government was involved was to end leakage or corruption. So it's supposed to save them more than $10 billion a year by going digital. But challenges remain. Account dormancy, as I told you, it's who cares about registered accounts? It's active accounts, and we're seeing that many of these accounts are not active, even though they did open them. And
this is not smartphone. Not smartphone.
This is not smartphone. Not smartphone. And this is also one of the other challenges is that it's not getting the private sector really involved. There's no real cooperation. The private sector is being dragged along, being forced to open up these accounts, but their heart really isn't that interested in providing these services. So it's still in early phases. But we have a video on that as well before I hand it over to Tim to conclude on the last government trend. But I wanted to show you sort of how this works in India.
India's fast-growing economy is home to more unbanked people than any other country. Since 2009, India has added new pieces to its financial infrastructure. It has built 3 interconnected layers: a biometric identity database, simplified payments addressing, and market-wide digital payments interoperability. Together, called India Stack, these new layers have the potential to bring dramatic change. To see how it works, let's meet Seema, a garment worker who migrated to Bangalore from a rural region of Odisha. As a migrant, she does not have a permanent address, and banks often require multiple ID documents to open an account. In 2009, the Indian government created the Unique Identification Authority of India, which has enabled over 1 billion residents, including Seema, to easily obtain an identity number linked to their biometric data. Using only her identity number and biometrics, Seema can now open an account quickly. And the electronic identity allows financial service providers to instantly conduct KYC checks. A second layer of infrastructure allows Seema to link her identification number, phone number, and bank account number under a simplified payments address. This address can be easily shared with her employer to receive her salary digitally. The third layer is a market-wide interoperable payments system. Seema can now use her phone to send money instantly to her mother, who has also recently opened an account at a different provider. Her mother can withdraw the funds in rural Odisha using only her ID number and her fingerprints. 2 additional layers are being added. The digital locker, where people can securely upload digital copies of personal documents, such as academic records, vehicle registrations, or birth certificates. And a new system for e-consent, enabling people to selectively share their personal documents and data. These new layers would allow SEMA to share her key financial documents to apply for a loan or access other services. Together, the layers form a new national infrastructure connecting business, government, and hundreds of millions of people like SEMA to the financial system.
Before I hand it over to Tim to discuss another trend in government involvement, I just wanted to clarify one thing. This mobile technology and these mobile financial services, don't confuse those with cryptocurrencies. This is not Bitcoin, which is a very different problem. This is, a digital form of the government-issued money.
So, continuing with the theme of what governments can do and are doing, and picking up on Kazuto's reminder, next year, Japan, as G20 president, will play a very, very important role as the lead co-chair in the G20's Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion, or GPFI. So it's fitting for us to close the formal presentation by discussing why global intergovernmental bodies like the GPFI matter for financial inclusion. The GPFI has 4 subgroups, but we'll focus today on the subgroup on regulation and so-called standard-setting bodies, or SSBs, the acronym by which they describe themselves. To demonstrate why SSBs matter for financial inclusion, let's consider one customer's story. Dalise lives on the remote Philippine island of Tingloy. She has no government-issued ID and no officially recognized address. Nonetheless, thanks to flexible standards of the relevant SSB, a letter from her village leader allows her to open an account with GCash, a payment and value storage service operated by the country's second-largest mobile network operator, essentially very similar to the M-Pesa product that we saw in Kenya. She uses her mobile phone to receive remittances and to pay back her loan from a microfinance institution that is located on the mainland. She makes cash withdrawals and deposits into her GCash account at the corner store. And providers in the Philippines are developing microinsurance products for customers like Dalise, and the government is weighing whether to offer her microdenomination bonds, all via her mobile. It turns out that this suite of appropriate products is regulated at the country level in the Philippines by no less than 4 different Philippine regulatory bodies. And in turn, these regulatory bodies have to apply the standards and guidance issued by 6 different SSBs. CGAP has been working with the standard-setting bodies now for more than a decade, and during this period, we've gone from one lone SSB, the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, working on financial inclusion, to a situation where all of them are involved. And all of them now collaborate actively with the GPFI subgroup on regulation and SSBs to understand how their standards and guidance will affect which core customers like Dalise get access to what range and quality of financial services and at what cost. Last year, the GPFI updated the G20's Financial Inclusion Action Plan, noting the SSB's progress on mainstreaming financial inclusion in their work. The updated plan includes an important objective to build on this momentum: the establishment of a standing platform owned by the SSBs themselves to pursue joint work on cross-cutting issues of relevance to financial inclusion and the work of multiple SSBs. We're very hopeful that the Japanese G20 presidency will also be able to count the creation of such a financial inclusion forum for the SSBs as a signature achievement of your year as the lead co-chair of the GPFI. And as this slide shows, Japan's membership in all of the relevant global bodies makes this a very realistic objective. And on that note, we want to say thank you for being such patient listeners and open the floor for questions and answers. Kazuto, will you moderate?
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation, and let's open the floor.